Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. Hello, welcome back, listeners. Again, thank you for tuning into Ambivalent Offenders. Today, I'm going to keep the chit-chat at the start light and get right to it. Remember, there's a giveaway on Instagram, ends on Friday. Right now, there's very good odds you will win. We'll have to post some pictures of the merch. I have it. Second thing, please rate, follow, and tell your friends. It's super exciting as we get more listeners. Okay, I want to put it out there right away that this is the third and last chapter of Alexandra's story. Believe me, I feel like I'm stumbling around being like, here is it. I don't know. Russian history has consumed a large chunk of my free time over the last few weeks. I mean, like last month, I feel like all I've been doing is Russian history.
Hey, it's made it easy for me. I've got plenty of time to research my next one.
I like my history, of course, but I'm ready to leave the Romanovs behind metaphorically. I'm not endorsing their slaughter at the hands of the Bolsheviks.
Too soon, Jamie. Too soon.
But as I said before, we do want to thank you all for listening in, downloading, subscribing. We're appreciative. It's been a project Erin and I have been wanting to do together for a long time. So being able to share these stories with people, well, I don't get the immediate satisfaction like seeing a student learn in the classroom and telling a story. It's still pretty damn great.
Yeah, we love it. So whether you like it or not, we're going to keep going.
Yep. Okay, let's get to it. Part 3. I want to start back at Bloody Sunday in 1905. With our favorite guy, Erin. You threw up a nice reel on Instagram.
A daddy, Papa Gapan.
Yep. Again, I want to start with the political side. So remember, the Russian people believe their own leader had fired on them.
Not good.
Right. Nicholas wasn't even there. He did not give the order, but that is how it was perceived.
You're still the head of the government, so the buck stops with him.
Exactly. I want to note this because Nicholas is really out of options. Remember, they were coming to give these requirements. He consented to a parliament called the Duma. So you might be hearing and saying, yay, constitutional monarchy. Not so much. The first 2 Duma sessions that happened, members were chosen indirectly. I have no idea what that means.
Yeah. How does that work?
I read that in the biography and I'm like, okay.
It's a hat, like names on a hat or like a lottery.
They weren't voted for. And surprising, actually, peasants made up the larger chunk in these groups. You want to take a guess why?
Why they made up a larger chunk? Because there's probably more peasants than anything else.
Nope.
No?
Nothing to do with population. Nope.
Well, then tell me why. Don't make me keep guessing.
They tended to be more conservative. Remember, these are the real Russian people. So Nicholas and his ministers prefer that because they, compared to the city people, tend to be more on the conservative side. I mean, kind of similar to our country a little bit with the rural, urban kind
separation.
of sway. Yeah. So you would think they would want to keep more of the nobility in, but actually, we're peasants. The other thing about the Duma, though, that I have to mention is it has major limitations to what it could do and what it couldn't do. And when they weren't in session, the Tsar was still allowed to issue any decree he wanted. So you really can say politically, very little had changed. On its surface, it's like, here, we gave you this parliament, but Nicholas still really has all the power.
You could say it has very little teeth. So it's, it's more the show of it, but it's not going to prevent
it's not a check.
controversy. Yeah,
it's not a check on Nicholas. So sorry, Papa Gapan.
Is this the last we see of Papa Daddy Gapan?
Yeah.
Bye, Papa. Nice knowing
I was going to say R.I.P. Like, I don't know when he died, but
he's definitely dead
he's
now.
Dead now. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, either way, he is dead now. So I can
definitely R.I.P.
say R.I.P. So 2 big events happen on June 28th, 1914. It's kind of crazy they both happen on the same day. So first event, For those who remember from history class, think about the spark of World War I. What is that spark that occurs? Erin, do you remember the spark?
Yeah, it's the murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand.
Mm-hmm. I would say not the band, but now it's such an old reference that back in our days they had to say not the band. Now it's not a thing. Yes, so the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, he was heir to the Austrian and Hungarian throne. So many heirs, right? So many Tsarevich's heirs, right? So he's next in line to the Austrian and Hungarian throne. He visits Serbia, which is part of his nation, but they hate him. Mm-hmm. But it's not necessarily him. They hate Austrian-Hungarian rule because #nationalism. They don't see themselves as part of that empire. They see themselves as Slavs, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So it's interesting that he goes to visit there because, as I said, this is a part of the empire that is, I don't want to say on fire, but practically.
He knew that there were threats against him as well.
Exactly.
He's also on my list. I think at some point we will cover his story because it is also very interesting and has some parallels to Alexandra and Nicholas's story.
So he's assassinated along with his wife. We are definitely coming back to this. Obviously, it's a spark of World War I. Mm-hmm. But second event, just hours later on that same day, not planned, this in a Siberian village. So we're back in Russia. Good old Rasputin. Remember last we saw he was exiled by, I mean, not really exiled, but kind of kicked out of St. Petersburg by Tsar Nicholas. Rasputin's walking through the streets and he's stabbed by a woman who is hired to kill him. Again, I'll get into that in the Rasputin episode, the whole background of that. But to know he's stabbed, and not only that, he's in not good shape, really rough shape. As in, you could see his intestines, bad shape.
The viewers can't see my face, but
yeah. When I was reading it, I was like,
no, and I'm clutching my belly.
Right. The local doctor puts him on a table and is pretty much like, nothing I can do. So they call for another doctor who's 6 hours away. Somehow this doctor makes it by train, 6 hours there, and Rasputin is still alive, barely. He performs surgery on him. Get this, Rasputin requested no anesthesia.
Dude, take the anesthesia.
I know. I'm like, you're a drunk and you're into orgies, but like,
I draw the line at anesthesia. This is reminding me of our mother always tells stories about going to a dentist that didn't give any pain meds. Dentist sounds bad enough. I can't imagine surgery without any pain medication or anesthesia.
Yeah, so this was for our mom in the early 60s. They went to a dentist. So can you imagine getting her teeth pulled and stuff without any pain? Ugh. Anyway,
I just want to know how in the world without modern medicine, this is a world a little bit before antibiotics would come in for another like 2 decades or so. And how in the world did he survive?
How did you know he survived? He does. He does.
I know this is not his end.
Yeah. He does pass out, obviously, from the pain because that's what your body's going to do. He's bedridden for months, but he does survive. Just as Erin said, he survives this assassination attempt. But be forewarned, I'm going to be using the word assassination a lot during this episode. It's going to come up a lot.
That's the theme for this week.
Right. Now back to #that other assassination. Austria-Hungary is obviously not so happy about Serbia. They tell Serbia they have 48 hours to respond to the following demand. An investigation in Serbia. Suppression of all Serb nationalist groups. Any anti-Austrian official has to be dismissed, so on. They're really pulling out all the stops. This is a huge list of demand. Now, you might be like, okay, well, how does Russia fit into this picture? Well, Russia fits in because they consider themselves to be protectors of all Slavic people, which the Serbs were. So Serbia asks for help. So right away, war is not declared yet. but Nicholas sends troops along the Austrian border. So it's not a declaration of war, but he's mobilizing some troops. Now, cousin Willie, Nicholas's cousin, and Alexander's cousin,
Kaiser Wilhelm.
Yep, Kaiser Wilhelm II is, at this point, again, the head of Germany. He aids the Emperor of Austria-Hungary.
Betrayal.
Right. So they're on opposite side. But he truly believes that there's no, I'm just going to say it, no fucking way that his cousin Nicholas is going to drag Russia into a costly European war with all, I'm gesturing right now, this going on in Russia. So he's just like, no, this isn't going to happen.
He knows Nicholas has a lot on his plate domestically. So he's most likely, at least in Kaiser Wilhelm's view, he doesn't think that he's going to go to war.
Right, exactly. I do want to make clear, because this is Alexandra's episode, she's actually not in on this decision, which is going to come back. So I want to make it clear, she's not in on this decision. But Nicholas does speak to his foreign minister, who says that Russia must mobilize. And Nicholas agrees, of course. I feel like Nicholas is just that yes guy. You give him a plan, he's like, yep, okay.
I think he's the person who agrees with the last person who we talked to.
Exactly, 100%. At this point, foreign minister says Russia must mobilize. Basically, we're getting close to declaring war. Then Alexandra finds out. Remember, while she has been in Russia for many years at this point, she is German-born. And as I said, she's also a cousin of cousin Willie, Kaiser Wilhelm.
They're all cousins.
They're all cousins, right? So she storms into Nicholas's study, and we know from good old discreet Anna, Alexandra's good old friend Anna, who keeps everything quiet, that there's a screaming match between the two, which is pretty surprising because we'll talk later on. Like, these guys are in love even after how many years of marriage. So many love letters. Anyway, it ends with Alexandra sobbing in bed, saying, war, and I knew nothing of it. This is the end of everything. A little dramatic,
but I'm sure she saw it as a betrayal because, again, she thinks that Nicholas is consulting with her on everything and to be taken off guard. And that she was born in Germany, as you said. So it's a lot for her to take in. But I also love Anna being the early page 6 before page 6 or TMZ, just reporting on the stuff that's going on in the Imperial Palace.
Yep, I see her typing away. And that quote, that idea of I knew nothing about it, that's a part of her that feels really betrayed.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think most of us in relationships,
if somebody makes a big decision without you.
Yeah, and for most of our decisions, it's not going to war with our old homeland. So
right.
It's understandable that she would feel upset.
It is. On the other hand, the Tsar technically is the autocratic leader. She technically,
she has no power.
She has no power. But in the past, we know Nicholas and Alexander have pretty much ruled together.
But that's more because of their relationship, not because that's how the government's set up. Yeah,
exactly. Cousin Willie, though, he's not done. He appeals to Nicholas one more time. He notes, quote, you can still save the peace of Europe by stopping your military measures, end quote. There's a lot of moving parts with World War I, so you can't place the blame solely on Nicholas. But as kind of cousin Willie is hinting here, Nicholas could have called off mobilization because remember, Germany and Austria-Hungary, they have done nothing to Russia. This is just we are supporting Serbia because they're Slavs. Whether it was a sense of duty or pressure from his military officials, Nicholas, though, forges ahead and war has begun.
I do wonder if he was thinking it would distract from the domestic side of things. Like we talked about, I think, in part 2 with the Russo-Japanese
War.
War. That even though that ended badly for Russia, that war is always good for patriotism. So maybe he thought, obviously, he didn't think that they were entering a world war that would span years. So I just wonder if he thought, this might be good for me.
We're going to see a surge of patriotism here at the beginning. But when Alexandra first heard of the Russian troops mobilizing, she can't help but telegram Rasputin, because, of course, remember, he's still bedridden from being stabbed. Yep. And his reply is ominous. He says, let Papa being Nicholas, some of these.
Not Gapan. Not Papa Gapan.
He said,
did he call Tsar Nicholas Papa to his face?
I know, in person. The idea of seeing Rasputin saying Papa, yeah,
it's giving daddy,
leather daddy.
I bet you know he would get turned on calling Nicholas Papa.
Oh, I know. So now saying it feels really weird. I forgot I would have to say this. Okay. Quote, let Papa not plan war, for the war will come, the end of Russia and yourselves, and you will lose to the last man. End quote.
I mean, he's not wrong.
Alexandra takes this telegram. She tries to use it to convince Nicholas to call it off, but the Tsar rips it up. So you can start to see a kind of division happening between this royal couple that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, they've always been lockstep before this.
When Nicholas tells her that war had officially been declared on Germany, you can probably guess her reaction.
Probably a lot of tears. She's probably really upset.
Yep. She cries and she flees to her room. We'll see this as a pattern. When in doubt, she cries. And she's an emotional person. I get it. Sometimes that's my first reaction. Sometimes it's crying. Okay. So this next part is going to sound very familiar. Erin already hinted at it. The Tsar and Tsarina make it back to the Winter Palace as the Russian people fill the square. But instead of them coming to march for a demonstration, like with Bloody Sunday, they're united again. Nationalism, and they're ready to fight for their Tsar. They actually start singing the national anthem, which begins, I don't know how it goes, so I'm not going to sing it. Although we've already sung, and I already told Erin, somehow in the first few episodes, both of us have managed to sing. But I don't know how it goes. But I know the words are God Save the Tsar. It's kind of similar to God Save the Queen.
Or God Save the King.
Man. This is maybe, again, a way to bring the people together, right? Unite them against a common enemy. Okay, right? We're all Russian people together, us versus them. Things are finally going to be good, right?
Well, if you know the story, no, but I could see at this point that they're thinking maybe this is the answer to things. This is how Russia gets both its prestige back after the failure of their previous war, the Russo-Japanese war, and that this is perhaps how they tamper down on some of the domestic policy and domestic disputes. But I know that things do not go smoothly
quite that way. So yeah, the answer is nope, does not go that way. I have to use another direct quote because I think it explains the situation as well as you can, especially if you're not familiar with what's going to happen next. So get yourself ready. Quote, no country ever went to war so poorly equipped, so badly led, so foolishly optimistic as Russia, end quote. So I want to kind of pull that out there, right? Poorly equipped, badly led, foolishly optimistic. We're already starting to see that optimism, right? They're like, this is the time we're going to win. We'll talk about leadership and we'll talk about equip shortly. Now, Russia does have, even though this podcast is not about strategy, I do want to say that Russia does have one big advantage, which is
has a shit ton of people.
Yeah, tons of people. Still not good, though. Russian soldiers start the war going into battle swinging sabers. And if you're familiar with World War I, this is really the war where offensive techniques, strategies, and the offensive weaponry is much stronger than the defensive, right? The defense ends up being, let's take a trench and hide, right? So this is like the last war where you also have not the Russians, but you have
cavalry,
yeah. But in a very similar way, I see this. So you have Russian soldiers with sabers being mowed down by German artillery because we have the first
machine guns.
There we go. We have the first machine guns, so they're just being obviously mowed down.
I think for people to visualize, World War I's kind of sits between the old war, the old techniques of war that Napoleon used, and obviously the things that will be deployed in World War II. So you have, again, saber and machine guns in the same war, which seems wild. And then you also have things like mustard gas and other weapons of war.
Yep. And another thing, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, airplanes, beating of planes. So Siberian soldiers who had seen none of this stuff before, they see planes. So that is a sign from God that he's on the other side, because they're like, whatever this miracle thing is. And as I said, poorly equipped, the industry, the mobilization of getting weapons to the soldiers was horrible. So with not enough firearms, lines of soldiers basically had to wait until the line in front of them was mowed down before they could collect a weapon of their own.
We're like, all right, he's down. I'm gonna do it.
Now I got a weapon. Yep. So complete disaster. But back to Alexandra, as this is her episode. Her reputation isn't helped by the fact that Russia is now at war with her birth country. A violent mob had actually attacked the abandoned German embassy, and even German bakeries were hit with violence.
Ooh.
I know. Their windows were smashed.
Yeah.
So a lot of anti-German sentiment. Unsurprisingly, there was definitely this sentiment hurled at her, unfair as it was. Her response about any German sympathies that people thought she might have was clear. She said, quote, 20 years I have spent in Russia, half my life, and the fullest, happiest part of it, end quote.
Yeah, now, that's what, I mean, to be fair, like she's probably in her 40s at this point. Like, she spent her formative years in Russia. She probably considers herself more Russian than German at this point.
Exactly. The people, of course, still didn't believe it. In fact, after the Russian Revolution happens, when Alexander Palace was searched, they thought that for sure there were going to be these secret stations where she communicated with her cousin, the Kaiser. Nothing was found, of course.
Yeah. I think that it's like they fundamentally don't understand her because she loves her husband. Obviously, she's the Tsarina too, but she loves her husband. She would prioritize him over anybody else. I don't think she's prioritizing cousin Willie over her husband and her home country.
Exactly. Another event that occurs that would eventually make Alexandra even more hated than she was before. By 1915, Nicholas, seeing how horrific the war was going for Russia, so by the summer of 1915, so we're only a year into the war, 1.4 million Russian soldiers had already been killed or wounded.
Crazy.
He decides to take charge of the military himself, despite overwhelming opposition to it.
Well, like, commendable, but my dude, you've not fought in anything. You do not have credentials. Bravo that you're gonna suffer with the rest of them, but
biographer King actually is in a way kind of like, he doesn't call it the worst move because obviously Russia was being so poorly led at this point, but it's not a smart move. He's not a war strategist. Yeah, he's not fought in the war. So imagine Lincoln himself leading the Union Army. I have a quote that it's actually very fitting from your man, Napoleon Bonaparte. Yeah. He says, quote, a sovereign should not be with the army unless he is a general, unquote.
True.
One person, though, who was overjoyed by the decision to lead was Alexandra. So in one of her many, many, many letters, they send hundreds of letters back and forth. This one sent to Nicholas before he left. She wrote, quote, "Sleep well, my sunshine, Russia's savior," end quote. And she signed it Sonny.
Cute, but
no.
He's, the man who's never fought before, has never strategized war. He's going to be Russia's savior. Absolutely. Yeah.
It's kind of the delusion that I feel like that the imperial family has all along this whole time. It's like they're in their own bubble of reality.
Mm-hmm. I'm also surprised. I thought she would be distraught with the idea of him being at the front, possibly being in danger. I know that she has never been comfortable with him being away, so this is surprising.
Well, she's a little more comfortable with it this time because we're going to see here shortly. But let's talk about first, what is she doing during the war at the beginning? While other noble women, so those in the aristocracy, simply gave money to hospitals and charity organizations, Alexandra did do something really admirable. She took nursing classes, she studied anatomy, and she helped in hospital work, hoping to inspire others to do that as well. She essentially turned the Catherine Palace into a makeshift hospital, and she herself worked the floors, helping soldiers, seeing their horrifying injuries and the reality of war. So it's not like she is just kind of like, here's the money or here's the palace. Okay, bye. Or, I'm going to oversee this. She herself is on the floor working as a nurse.
That you have to love. I commend her for doing that because she didn't have to do that. As Tsarina, nobody expected that of her. This is something new that she's bringing to the table. And I know that she also has her daughters working there as well. So it's not just her. The imperial family is giving back. That's exactly what you would want to see in a time of war.
Right. Keyword there, C. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But she is very much, this gives her purpose. She had spent many of her times lounging without kind of a sense of purpose. She's getting up. She's working hard. So she's spending hours physically nursing soldiers back to health. Now, here's the part that, again, our PR piece, this was all done in the palace. So it's not seen or known about by the public. There's not like, again, if they had a PR person or somebody who's like sending out, I don't know, some bulletins.
Anna,
I know.
Write it up in Russian TMZ. Use your gift of the gab for something good.
Yeah, gab about something that's going to help your girl.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to quote, you found this quote. I like this quote. It perfectly describes it. A later monarch, not from Russia, but from the UK, Elizabeth II, who famously said that she had to be seen to be believed. So even when Alexandra was working for the common good of the Russian people, she wasn't seen. And so it was pretty much like the work she didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
Just as she had always done, she kept herself out of the public eye. So while you can admire her nursing work, of course, it's also hard to overlook the fact that while the Tsar was gone, she really could have made appearances to boost morale in the cities. Instead, she took refuge in the hospital, gave her purpose, gave her also a way to stay out of the public.
Yeah.
And when she did make appearances, for example, she went to military hospitals in 1915. You think this would be the perfect chance for her to shine as she's working with soldiers all day, right? This is her wheelhouse.
Yeah, she's in her element.
But instead, no matter how much she tried to express her sympathy, it's like there was something about her that she could never get it to come across.
Mm-hmm.
So the Grand Duchess Marie Pavlovna had accompanied her to these military hospitals, and she noted this, quote, that there was something in her, her being Alexandra, eluding definition that prevented her from her communicating her genuine feelings and from comforting the person she addressed, end quote.
So she's the anti-Diana, Spencer. She can't sit there and she can sympathize probably, but she can't empathize and can't make them feel like she really understands what they're going through.
Right. There's something about her that there's always this wall up. Now back to Rasputin. Rasputin.
Everybody was waiting for it.
Yeah. Here's the return of Rasputin. Rasputin returns to St. Petersburg during World War I. And at this time, he's watched over very closely by police detectives who are doing two things. They're technically protecting him, and they're observing his actions and pretty much writing everything he's doing for a report that's going to come out later. And he was doing everything that we think when we think of Rasputin. That is what he was doing. People were coming in and out at all hours. Sometimes they paid these sessions with Rasputin with sex, and those from high society who came sometimes brought things like money, jewels, food, wine.
He was more than happy to accept all the luxuries of being in that the orbit of the upper class.
Yeah, and the high society people also weren't above the sex as well. So I want to make that clear. Something I didn't know about him is, though, he seemed to be disinterested in money. So when people would pay him in money, he'd just throw it in a drawer. There's also stories like when people came to him were like saying how they were struggling or poor, that he would give them like jewels. So it doesn't seem like that part was super important to him, which I think is interesting.
Yeah.
Those who supported Rasputin claimed that these notebooks full of all these activities that were being written by the police were made up. But even worse for Rasputin, there's a larger report from all of these different police officers and basically spies in a way.
Yeah.
A report was written up by the Deputy Minister of the Interior, who I'm just going to call General Vladimir because I can't pronounce his last name.
That's okay.
So, Vladimir's his first name. So Nicholas reads this report first, and he calls on Rasputin, pissed. He basically like, come to the palace now, and you need to explain yourself. Rasputin grovels. He's like, I'm a simple man. I was drunk. But I swear I never...
I mean, he probably was.
He was.
To be fair.
Right. But he swears that he never spoke about the imperial family, despite lots of evidence he had.
Yeah.
So he's definitely doing some lying there. He for sure was talking about the imperial family, but he's going to grovel. When Alexandra read the report, she... What do you think?
Cried.
Yeah, she burst into tears, of course. Even though Alexandra, I don't want you to think she was delusional, she knew the report was true. She still wanted General Vladimir dismissed. She was still angry about him, like, showing up with this report.
So she believed it, but she was mad that it came about, period.
Right. Exactly. And we'll see more of this pattern later on.
Wait, say what you want about Alexandra. She stands by her man or her men.
Does. And the Tsar gives in to Alexandra eventually. So Rasputin keeps his power. Now, here's a little, when you're talking about gossip and some hot gossip. During this time, Alexandra and Anna's friendship becomes strained.
Because she was gossiping? The gossip?
No. Even more. Oh, I don't want to say scandalous because, well, here, we'll get into it. Alexandra saw Anna trying too hard to become close to the Tsar.
Oh, did she think she was moving in on her man?
No. So in the biography, it's clear that she trusted Nicholas. Obviously, they had a very tight relationship. And it was hard to see exactly what Anna was trying to do, whether she was trying to gain favor, not necessarily clearly like sexually coming on to him. But obviously Alexandra disliked this action And Anna was also writing the Tsar letters.
No, not my man.
Nope,
not Nikki.
Nope, Alexandra literally says, burn those letters.
Oh, no.
So now Anna and Rasputin seem to be out of contact with the royal family. Because remember, Anna's the in-between. She's the one who is connecting Alexandra and Rasputin. So without her, how is Rasputin getting sent to the palace? Like, she's the person, really.
This must be hard for Alexandra, too, because those are arguably her closest friends. Those are the people that she trusts. So the fact that they're out, I'm sure that didn't make situations any better for her.
Right. But of course, this is going to help history, right? No, we know history's stranger than fiction. So there's actually two events that are going to bring, well, both Rasputin and Anna, but especially Rasputin, back into Alexandra's life. First, the event's going to happen to Anna. That's going to bring them, the three of them, all back together. So a train Anna was riding on gets derailed and it's stuck in deep snow.
Oh, no.
Anna is trapped for hours. Her skull is shattered. Her legs are literally crushed under machinery and her spine is severed.
Oh no, Anna, I knew you were a little chatty Cathy and presumably trying to bone Nicholas. I don't know. Jamie says no.
Dumpy Anna.
But I'm still sorry now for talking shit about you. And also, what's with Russians and trains? This is very Anna Karenina.
I know. So
tell me she survives, because otherwise I'm going to feel really bad for.
Well, let me tell you, Alexandra, despite her feud, rushes to Anna's bedside, as does Rasputin. So this is gonna, we run into each other at the bedside of Anna. No,
I can see it. I can see it in the movie.
It totally happens. Actually, I think it happened in the How I Met Your Mother episode. So it happens. When Rasputin arrives, he comes close to Anna. He speaks to Anna. Anna's got her eyes closed. She does open her eyes when he comes in. And he's like whispering prayers. And then Rasputin tells Alexandra, quote, she will recover, but she will remain a cripple, end quote. And just as he predicted, Anna does survive, which is pretty miraculous.
Yeah, with all the injuries and the train. Although if he does have truly healing powers, I'd be like, you couldn't just heal me all the way. But still, the fact that she survived.
Yeah, she will use crutches for the rest of her life, but she does survive. Now, here's the second event that is, again, going to bring Rasputin even closer to Alexandra, really solidify his space as bestie and kind of sidekick. So Alexei went with Nicholas to supervise troops. Alexandra did not want him to go, obviously. Right, helicopter mom. She's like, no, I don't want you taking him anywhere. But Nicholas is determined not to make the same mistakes his dad did and leave Alexei unprepared. So he sees this as like training to be Tsar.
This was positive. I can't blame him on that one.
But Alexei catches a cold. Now, normally a cold, not a big deal. But remember, hemophilia. But you might be like, okay, how's that going to deal with the cold? Well, he gets a nosebleed, and his nose bleeds. His temperature rises. By the time the train finally got back to St. Petersburg, to Alexandra, both doctors who were there said that there was little hope. He could die at any moment.
All from a nosebleed? Just because of that much
Alexei's
blood?
Yeah, Alexei's nose is just pouring blood.
Damn.
So, feeling she has no options, Alexandra does what she does when she feels like she's backed into a corner and has no options. She calls Rasputin. He runs to the palace. He runs straight to Alexei's room. Alexandra's there, like, exhausted, like, kind of half asleep, just covered in her son's blood. And Nicholas is there as well. And Rasputin goes to the end of the bed. The Tsar and the Tsarina pray with him And then finally, Rasputin gets ready to leave, and he says to them, quote, "Don't be alarmed. Nothing will happen," end quote. The next day, Alexandra wakes up. She returns to Alexei's room, and he is sitting up in bed. The bleeding stopped during the night.
Oh, yeah, this was another case of the miraculous healing that we have no idea why, how it happened.
But obviously, Alexandra's going to be like, I've seen this now happen how many times where he's been close to death, that she's going to really rely on Rasputin, because how could she not?
Yeah.
But Nicholas can't stay because he is running the army, right? So who was left to make decisions about Russia with Nicholas off at war?
I'm going to guess it's our girl.
It's our girl, Alexandra. And due to his growing influence, Rasputin, to an extent, although I'm going to talk about that here in a little bit. But honestly, even though Alexandra does not do well, it's really hard to think anyone tasked with that job could do well. Nobody wanted that job. Anyone probably would have failed. But King, again, Alexandra's biographer, write, quote, "In the 2.5 years that followed, the government deteriorated with a shocking rapidity that is without parallel in modern history," end quote. So why would he say something like this? Alexandra distrusts the Duma and pretty much all ministers, even though the ministers technically work for the Tsar. She feels like all of them are after the Tsar's throne or trying to steal some of his power. And she sees the Tsar's throne as her son's throne. So her goal is the preservation of the autocracy, essentially at any cost. She's labeled as intoxicated with power. And pretty much every time Nicholas makes a mistake, and he makes a lot of them, Alexandra grabs more and more power.
Yeah.
Now the question is, because Rasputin also gets thrown in here, how much power did Rasputin have?
Yeah, this is where the traditional story is that he is right there with Alexandra, firing firing those ministers, leading her on. So yeah, what's the truth of that?
So from the biography again that I read from King, he says stories have given Rasputin way too much credit. King says between 1915 and 1917, there's basically 7 of the most powerful seats in this inner circle with the Tsar. So they're positions like prime minister, ministers of the interior. I'm not going to go through all of them, but like kind of these 7.
Think of them as
powerful.
Like the cabinet and
exactly
like with the presidency and the
exactly.
USA.
They're the ones who are like informing normally the Tsar on these top issues. So 7 positions, 7 seats. Alexandra went through 26 men in 30 months.
Oh, Alexandra. Alexandra.
Now, yeah. Some were fired, others quit. But if we're going back to Rasputin, of those, only 4 could have been because of Rasputin.
Okay, so this is where Alexandra, I have a little sympathy for her. She's in an impossible situation. She's being thrown into this. She obviously thinks she's doing what's right for the country, for Nicholas, and for Alexei. But this is where evidently she has no self-awareness.
Right.
I mean, I'm trying to look at this in the viewpoint of, if this was a man, would I be weird about it? And yeah, I would say, my dude, you're in trouble.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And that then becomes a question of, okay, if only 4 can really be possibly attributed to Rasputin, why have people blamed him? Well, to be fair, he puts himself into the narrative. He tried to create this impression that he was controlling Alexandra, even though he never dared to go against her decisions. She was clearly the more dominant one. But outside of the palace, when he's talking, when he's doing his thing,
it makes him look like a big shot.
Yeah. He's like, basically, she bows down to me, right? That is not true, but he is talking that up. Now, Alexandra also has a piece in this, too, because she would use Rasputin's name to give more weight to her decisions. So if somebody went against her decision, she would be like, well, Rasputin and I think. So it's like another person to justify.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who went up against her decisions, her first reaction is to feel threatened. She told Nicholas that he had to back her up on any of these feelings. So anytime somebody she feels like is threatening her, she's basically like, Nicholas, you need to take care of this. Russia, she wrote, thank God is not a constitutional monarchy.
Girlie, your grandma Vicky was a constitutional monarchy.
And then in a letter to Nicholas, she wrote, quote, the Tsar rules and not the Duma. Forgive my writing, but I am fighting for your reign and baby's future.
Okay, but baby's not gonna have a future if you keep this up.
Yeah, baby being Alexei. For those for people, if they're like, who's baby?
It's not Baby Houseman from Dirty Dancing.
No, nobody puts baby. Nobody puts baby in the corner. Well, she probably would say that.
That would be her motto.
Right.
That would be her ultimate. No, not even the Duma.
Yeah. So at this point, we saw Russians go from this wave of patriotism to obviously patriotism is rare, right?
Yeah.
Their morale is low. One story says Alexandra goes out into this town and there's this old woman who is viewed as a holy person. And Alexandra approaches her and the woman said, quote, here is the martyr Empress Alexandra, end quote.
What now? What now?
To be a martyr, I have to be dead.
Yeah. So the Tsarina seems like she didn't get it. Like she left, they said, like pretty happy. But those who are around her.
Yeah, I feel like
they got.
Excuse me. You do know what a martyr is.
Like, right. They view it very differently. They're like, ooh, this is an ill omen.
Yeah.
This is not good.
What now?
Right. To be martyred, you got to be dead. So not so positive. And rumors and speculation just rose across the cities, mostly that the imperial family had been corrupted by Rasputin, and either Rasputin or the imperial family needed to be removed. Really first starting with Rasputin, but Rasputin stays. Now, Nicholas's own mom even gave Nicholas an ultimatum. She said, exile, dismiss Rasputin, or she's going to leave the capital. Guess what he chooses?
Well, we know that he's a mama's boy, but does he choose Rasputin over mama?
He does. So his mom leaves the capital.
Big for a mama's boy.
I know, but that just shows you how much, I would say, Alexandra has a year.
Yeah. I would say, part 2, happy wife, happy life. And that's the motto that Nicholas lives by.
Right. And it's not just his mom. The entire Romanov extended family were able to see the end of the dynasty coming. They're like, it's right there. And they're trying to get Nicholas to do something, whether it's exiling Rasputin, set up a new government that, has maybe a parliament with some power. He needed to change something. They all clearly see it.
So they're not all deluded.
Exactly.
They see what's coming up, but he's, for some reason, whether it's Alexandra or his own beliefs or a combination of the two, refusing to do what it takes to keep away disaster.
Yeah, I think it's both of them, because here's the last part of the story. Alexandra's sister, Ella, again, her older sister, if you listen to the mini episode, you'll know she went into the convent. She was very into religion. She tries to appeal to her sister one more time about Rasputin. Alexandra wouldn't even discuss him. She wouldn't even bring up his name. So as Ella leaves, she says, remember the fate of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette.
Ella knows. Listen to Ella.
And if you're not a history person, those are the king and queen of France when the French Revolution came, and they were
both guillotined.
And this is going to be actually Ella and Alexandra's last meeting.
That's so sad.
Yeah. Conditions in the city were setting off more and more violence. With the war, there was a blockade of ships, and then the railroad lines were destroyed, and that meant very little food could be brought into the city and moved around, which is never a good thing. And also you got some hangry peasants. Everybody's hangry. And they're mad at the Tsar, right? Because not only is he losing battle after battle, but now he's also letting his own people starve because he's serving those two dual roles. Because he's the Tsar, he's supposed to be taking care of his people, and he's supposed to be winning the war.
And he's doing
neither.
Yeah, he's failing at both.
Exactly. Even soldiers in the military, a lot of times with no ammunition, or sometimes not even uniforms, they began defecting and joining riots in the street. And despite the riots and strikes that are happening, the government continues to do nothing because of, again, Alexandra and Nicholas. There's nothing happening. They're not trying to appease or change the situation. So now we're on to Rasputin's murder. This, I'm not going to go into detail. You might be like, no, because as I said, I'm going to do a Rasputin episode. And obviously his murder is a very famous piece of that. And this is Alexandra's story. But I do want to note that it occurred in late December 1916. And he goes missing, quote unquote missing. You'll learn more about what happened.
Yeah.
And then his body was found on New Year's Day, 1917. His injuries, he had been shot. His face was crushed. Of course, the word got out that Rasputin was dead, and it spread quickly, even without Anna. Although newspapers were forbidden to print any details. In the weeks following his murder, Alexandra, of course, is a mess. She wept on her couch. And, I mean, she's weeping, obviously, for Rasputin and the loss of him, and the loss of him as Alexei's kind of savior.
Well, not just Alexei's savior, but again, as one of the few people that she could talk to. So it's a blow. That's a blow to her and the imperial family. Yeah, not just because of Alexei, but she's already in a stressful situation. And now perhaps her 1 out of 2 confidants is gone.
Yeah. And Rasputin had actually told Alexandra many times, quote, "If I die or you desert me, you will lose your son and your throne within 6 months," end quote.
I don't love that being like a threat.
I know. It's very much of a like, don't leave me. It's a little abusive. So Alexandra is obviously in a lot of emotional pain, but she does know it's her duty to continue to work for Russia. So, in fact, even when the Tsar had returned from headquarters back to the capital, the ministers are still giving reports to Alexandra.
So she's still number one.
Yeah. As we're getting, again, more and more unrest, in an effort really to try to save Russia, one Grand Duke Sandro, I don't know again the pronunciation, we're going to go with that. He's very close with Alexandra and Nicholas, like close enough where he comes to her room. He wants to talk to her alone. Nicholas is there. But he comes to her and he pleads in an effort to try to, again, save Russia. He says, "Please, Alex, leave the affairs of the state to your husband." Nicholas sits there, says nothing, of course. What's he going to say in front of Alex? Alexandra shouted right back that all of this talk is ridiculous. Nicky is an autocrat. How could he share divine rights with the parliament?
Yeah.
So again, really focusing on the fact that God has given Nicholas this right to rule. A parliament is nowhere in that situation. You can't share that. And Sandro yelled back, "Your husband ceased to be an autocrat on October 17th, 1905. That was, again, when the Duma was created.
Wow. Yeah, this is really hard to find her sympathetic amidst this. I know she's under a lot of stress, and this is what she truly believes, but this is where you wish that she could heed the advice of other people, not just the Grand Duke Sandro, but her sister and the other members of the imperial family who were telling her to...
Yeah, all these people.
Mhm.
You'd think somebody could get to her or she could reflect in some way, but
Yeah.
it was not working. So revolution was stirring, obviously, at this point. And like we had talked about, from inside the house, actually the first wave of talk of revolution comes from the aristocracy, the government, and the Romanovs. They're
That's
all
huge.
they're planning to get Nicholas off the throne.
I'm sure you're going to talk about it. Are they trying to replace him with somebody else? So
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So they still want to keep, that's basically the thinking, is like, if we don't get Nicholas off the throne, there's going to be real trouble. We want to keep the system.
Yeah,
that Nicholas cannot be.
We want somebody who's more amenable to the Duma, the parliament, and working in conjunction with that.
Exactly.
And no Rasputin allowed. Well, he's dead,
Right.
so never mind.
Yep. Don't have to worry about him anymore. So behind the back, of course, of the Tsar and Tsarina, a new government is forming. Finally, on March 15th, 1917, Nicholas is basically backed into a corner by a crowd of his family and Grand Dukes, and he abdicates. So after 300 years of rule, seemingly the Romanovs are done. Except,
Technically,
as we said,
Alexei would be next in line.
Exactly. A manifesto was to be released announcing the ascension of Tsar Alexei II, with Grand Duke Michael as regent.
Okay. So his young son would technically be next in line.
Right. So the Romanovs would continue their rule over Russia. However, shortly after Alexandra and Nicholas think about this, they realize, even though he's not truly doing the ruling because he's too young, if they end up going to, for example, England, they flee, he cannot come with them.
Yeah. And this is where I think you have to emphasize that they're a very close family unit. They're not like a lot of royal families that you think of where the kids see their parents once a year. They are very much sort of emulating a middle class environment where the parents and the kids spend a lot of time together. They're what you would perceive it now as like a normal family.
Quote. Yeah. So, of course, they're not going to be okay with leaving Alexei behind, especially in the state that Russia is in.
Yeah. And I don't blame them for that. And I know Helen Rappaport, who's a historian who we've already mentioned, I've read some of her books and listened to some of her interviews. She's written lots about the Romanovs. She actually thinks that Nicholas was duped into abdicating, thinking that he could save Russia, that Russia would stay in the war. And then obviously that does not happen. What are your thoughts? Do you think that he thought that things would go different than they would?
Yes, of course. I think, again, first he thinks Alexei, but even when Alexei's not part of the picture, he's still thinking this provisional government is going to pretty much solve, I want to say, basically bring Russia back to peace internally. And things aren't going to change that much. Obviously, it's devastating for him, but he's not thinking that. At this point, there's no talk of a communist revolution, like a complete change of the government.
Yeah,
and things
just
like that.
Sort of cancel or
more power to the Duma, the parliament. But
this is going to be very similar to my episode next. Our next episode, the one that I'm going to be doing, we'll see that they trade a not so great monarch for his son. So it's not unusual. Like, we'll take the younger one because we'll have more influence over him.
Yeah. But before Tsar Alexei can do anything, actually Nicholas removes both him and his son from power, which is technically illegal because Alexei was already named Tsar. So Nicholas. Really,
do we know what was his thinking for that? I know that obviously Alexei was sick and they know he's not going to live unless something changes. He's not going to live a long life. What was his idea for abdicating on behalf of his son?
to protect him. So again, if they were going to go to England, if things got bad and they were going to go to England, they were all going to go to England.
They wanted to go together.
Right. And knowing that the situation was very unstable and so not even wanting his son to be in that situation.
Yeah. I would not blame any parent for not wanting to leave their child, their son. This is, I mean, we've talked about, especially Alexandra, how protective she was of him.
Yeah.
Leaving
He's
him,
like, 12 at this point?
Yeah, leaving him in Russia is not an option.
Now, it's going to be hard for Nicholas and Alexandra to accept their new identities as an ex-Tsar and ex-Tsarina. They lose all their titles. And at this point, they're confined to a wing in the Alexander Palace. Basically, the provisional government doesn't know what to do with them. It's this really touchy subject. It's, in a way, it's like with the French Revolution, where it's like, what do we do with them? Right now, we're just kind of keeping them here.
Yeah.
So for months, the Romanovs are there essentially laying around. There's nothing to do, obviously, and they're not allowed to leave. And so thinking about the past, this is gross, but a guard deliberately stationed himself in front of Alexandra's dressing room window.
Ew.
And of course, the soldiers are taunting the Tsar and Tsarina, calling them names, especially when they finally were allowed some freedom outside into this garden area. There's stories of them pushing over the Tsar and calling the Tsarina names. And their kids, of course, are obviously like in shock. They find this really hard to accept.
Yeah, I can imagine. They were all pretty young. Like, you know, I think the eldest, early 20s. It's a lot for a family like that to take it in. And again, they were all so close.
And to see your father, who previously was Tsar and, you know, one of the richest men in the world, and supposedly chosen by God to rule, now being kicked over by soldiers.
That's what I think, no matter what you think of monarchy and the Tsar and Tsarina, what they've done up to this point, I think you can recognize the humanity in that and the humanity in them and feel for them in captivity. I know we'll talk about, obviously, go into their deaths and such, these conditions, which they'll eventually find themselves in. They're bad for anyone. And then you add in the fact that children are there, children who did nothing wrong, but to be born into the wrong family.
Exactly. So you're saying, again, that humanizing piece. So I do have one story connected to Alexandra. There's one story where a soldier, he's like pulled aside and he's basically having to watch Alexandra. And he accuses her of despising Russian people, hating her adopted country, you know, basically all that the anti-Russian stuff, accusing her of being still that German person. And she explained, for once able to actually connect with somebody, she explained calmly that she had given birth to 5 children in the first 10 years of her rule, which prevented her from traveling around the country to be around the people.
Yep.
Again, he had accused her, "What? You're never with the people," and all of that. And
I was constantly pregnant, dude.
Yeah,
you don't understand what that's like.
Exactly. And again, we do know, obviously, Alexandra's personality piece, but yeah, the fact that her being pregnant and then caring for young children during that 10 years.
And we talked about her health problems, not only while pregnant, but post-pregnancy and between. There would not have been a lot of time between those pregnancies.
Exactly. And then the soldier, he's continuing to ask questions. So the soldier asks about her young life as a German. And she states that she had been German, but she had married a Russian and her children were Russians. And she herself now was Russian. And after this obviously this is very paraphrased, after this decently long conversation, he actually takes hold of her hand and admits that he had a really different idea of her. Supposedly, he said, "I was mistaken about you." And later, it was discovered that he's a Soviet deputy. So when he's actually connected with Tsarina herself, he sees her as a human. And actually, we'll see that from other guards as well.
Yeah.
As the story
Well,
continues.
and this is what makes it so sad, as we've talked about her struggle to put herself out there in front of the people and even in front of the nobility. But you can see that there's there's a part of her when she does connect that it goes well. People understand her. So this just feels like such a lost opportunity that obviously it's a little bit too late for her.
Yeah. Yeah, at this point. Big question you might be asking, because we know all the European families are related. So why didn't the other royals, aka family, across Europe take in the Romanovs? The biggest one that gets asked is about King George V in England. He feared his own position. And I put in here, even if it was just in his mind, like there was no way that the Romanovs were going to come in there and threaten his position, but he was so paranoid about it.
Well, they were also very disliked across Europe.
Yes, and that's why France here is going to be like, yeah, no, thank you.
Between the tabloid stories about Alexandra and Rasputin, at least some of the royals believed it. Not all of them, but some of them did. And just Bloody Sunday and all that, it gave them a bad reputation. So nobody wanted them in their country, because then also, what do you do with exiled royals?
Right. And France, again, was suggested, but the lies about Alexandra, as Erin, you just said, had made their way to France and across Europe. And they were like, no, you're not welcome here by an ambassador. The royal family, though, they can't stay in Alexander Palace forever. So they had to be moved as the Soviets argued their fate. So in August, they're sent on a train to Siberia a little after Alexei's 13th birthday. They arrive in a town called Tobolsk. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, Tobolsk, where they first enjoyed the little freedom they actually got, like where they could actually move around in this house and outside. But you're also in August in Siberia. So a few months later, when winter comes, the imprisonment becomes much harder, as the warmest place in their house rarely rose above 44 degrees.
Hey, you live in Minneapolis. You should know.
Well, I sympathize. I'm not a native Minnesotan, so I'm like, no, hell no, not Siberia. Alexandra tries to knit stockings, but her hands are too stiff from the cold and from her different illnesses and chronic pain. And they talk about when Christmas comes, of course, Christmas in exile was probably a low point.
Yeah, that would be very meager.
They are allowed to go to church, and the priest prayed for the imperial family, but he used their titles. And because of this, they were sent out of the church, even though it wasn't their choice, but the fact that he used their titles.
It's seen as dangerous. I'm sure that the government is worried about somebody either springing them from their imprisonment or even if they don't spring them from the imprisonment, getting public sentiment. If public sentiment goes with them, then that's dangerous.
Right. Because at this point, they are now hearing in Siberia rumors of another revolution in St. Petersburg that had come. And now the Bolsheviks, headed by Lenin, had taken power.
So we finally got our communists.
Yep. So the provisional government falls. And while they weren't exactly kind to the imperial family, the leader of the provisional government often did give them some freedoms. Obviously, they were not killed. They were trying to figure out what to do with them. It's hard to say treated humanely, but to a degree they were.
As much as you could in captivity.
Right. Especially now that the Bolsheviks, who are headed by Lenin, now take power. This is going to be a big problem to the imperial family because Lenin, his own older brother, was executed by Nicholas's father for an assassination attempt.
Yeah, that's not gonna go well for them.
Yeah, so Lenin's not going to feel the same. He's not going to feel any need to provide any basic comfort. Alexandra at this point pretty much is resigned to her fate. And so she naturally, when things get really hard, she turns to religion. So she feels like she's pushed by God. She's almost coming to peace with the end. She is allowed to write sometimes at some points. So writing to Anna, she said, quote, "Life here is nothing. Eternity is everything. And what we are doing is preparing our souls for the kingdom of heaven," end quote. So here's where movement starts happening, because as we know, Bolsheviks are in control. Lenin is in control. He's trying to figure out, what do we do with these royals? Because we got to do something now. Because just as Erin said, the longer they're alive, the more they are a threat.
Yeah.
So first, Nicholas and Alexandra were sent off to Ekaterinburg. And of course, they didn't know if the children were going to join them. They had no clue. They weren't given any information. But soon the children did join them.
I can't imagine the separation and the joy at reunion. But what I know about them at this time is at least Alexandra and Nicholas, I think, know what's coming. Some of the girls, some of the kids do as well, or at least sense it. But at least having a reunion temporarily must have been nice.
Yeah. So at this point, guards are surrounding both the interior, exterior. There's just guards everywhere. Way more supervision than they were before. Even using the bathroom was a chore with these guards. And as I had hinted before, interestingly enough, in King's biography, he says that the guards' attitude, because they were around the royal family all the time, they really start to change towards the family. So obviously when they came in, they're seeing them as these horrible tyrants ruling Russia, like the worst of the worst. And now, as they're spending day after day with them, they're seeing them as the sad but close-knit family. So the guards, most of them have that shift in perspective. What comes next is pretty much a setup. The best way to say it. The fate of the Romanovs comes down to these 4 letters sent to them over months about rescue plans. So they get these letters. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But the Tsar and Tsarina, they're not convinced by the letters about this rescue plan. And especially by the 3rd letter, they're trying to be like, no, we're not interested.
Yeah, is this trying to trap them? Sort of what they did with Mary Queen of Scots, where that solidified her death by them trying to trap them. So
Exactly. So they're like, we know the guards are going to get these letters eventually at some point. They could tell that the tone was not right. It was suspicious. But the letters could now be used to justify their murders. And Lenin felt it was politically necessary to kill the imperial family pretty much at the first opportunity. And so this is that opportunity. We do know that it was Lenin's orders to kill the imperial family in July of 1918. So Lenin did order it.
There's always questions, and I think most people have questions about why the whole imperial family had to die. Is that ever addressed in the letters?
Do you know anything?
No, I think there's questions around it just because the girls would not, well, especially after the abdication, technically the girls weren't allowed to rule. So even if he had killed Alexei and Nicholas, which I think a lot of people would have thought, okay, well, you're going to kill them, like they're kind of lost cause, at least Nicholas. But the girls, as we talked about, that women weren't really allowed to rule Russia post Catherine the Great. So a lot of people are like, well, it's kind of senseless. Yeah, I don't think there's ever been really a good answer. Why, except for cruelty.
And this is just my personal perspective, it's pretty much knowing the Romanovs and their family, like their faces as this imperial family. It was pretty much like they had to get rid of all of them. Yeah. The entire system. I mean, even how their bodies were treated afterwards, I feel like shows you that it's like about trying to erase them. So on the night of July 16th, 1918, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. There wasn't like anything else different that night. However, the captain of the guard had been told that this was a night that they will have to shoot them off. So the doctor in the house was asked to wake the family and tell them that there was danger from the city and that they're going to sleep in the basement where they could be more easily watched over, more protected. So the family gets moving, getting washed up and things like that. And about after 2 in the morning, the royal family left their rooms and were led to the basement. There was like this little hallway area, and those doors were closed. There was nothing on the floor. It was an empty space. One of the kids makes a comment about it, and so they bring in 2 chairs.
Yeah.
So at this point, there's 10 men in the basement with them, and they stood in front of them as Yurovsky, who is the head of the guards, so he's like the main guy at the house. He told the family that, quote, in view of the fact that your relatives are continuing their offensive against Soviet Russia, the Ural Executive Committee has decided to execute you. And at this point, the Tsar supposedly turns to face his family and then turns back to the guards and is asking, what?
Yeah.
What? Like,
this was a lot of information all at once.
Right. That one statement suddenly is huge, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he turns back to the guards, like I said, asking what? Nicholas is shot first, then Alexandra. They both die immediately. 4 girls, they're screaming, they're huddling together. Bullets are ricocheting. Alexei had survived at first because he was shielded by his dad's body, but then he was shot.
Yeah.
Only one of the girls were killed in the initial shooting, and then the rest were met with bayonets and more bullets.
Yeah. Supposedly the girls had packed a lot of jewels. And
yes.
So the jewels almost acted as like bulletproof vests. So that's why they had to be bayoneted. And
yeah,
if for some morbid reason that you want to see this in action, I think it's in the last season of The Crown or one of the latest seasons of The Crown on Netflix. They show at the beginning of it. So it's not easy to watch, but there is a reenactment.
So they show the...
Yeah, because I'm sure we'll talk about, because they use, since Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II's consort husband, he was related to the Romanovs. They used his DNA in the 90s to identify the Romanov bodies and make sure that none of them had gotten away. Anastasia did not get away. But yeah, here actually I'm going to see if I can find the episode.
Yeah, as Erin said, with the jewels and kind of that quote unquote bulletproof vest idea, that's a big reason why. And another reason, we'll talk about how the bodies were treated and found. There was this long lasting myth that Anastasia had somehow made it out.
It's The Crown season 5, episode 6. It revolves around that DNA identification.
Yeah. It's a much bloodier execution. They were told to aim for the heart. Like, they were trying to keep it as clean as possible, and obviously it was not clean.
No.
All in all, it took about 20 minutes, though, to erase 300 years of Romanov and the dynasty. The bodies were moved temporarily. They're thrown into an open mine shaft, and their grenades are thrown in. But as I said, it's temporary. They know they have to do something else to the bodies. They don't want them found. They don't want them identified. Mm-hmm. So they have somebody go into the mine shaft. They get the bodies out. They're moved. 2 are burned. 1 is mistakenly identified as Alexei. It's not Alexei. I believe it's Alexandra. They're burned. And then the rest, sulfuric acid was poured over the bodies so they couldn't be identified. The Soviets, they didn't want, any identification there, and obviously no place to have them be set up as martyrs or a place to go to pray or anything like that.
And I do think it's important to state that until the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of these details were kept under wraps. So it wasn't until the late 80s, early 90s that a lot of this information came to light, which is mind-boggling.
That's why there were so many rumors about what happened and possibly people escaping.
I think it's Nicholas's mom didn't think that the whole family was murdered for like the rest of her life. People knew that the Tsar and maybe Alexei were murdered, but there were rumors that the girls and Alexandra were elsewhere. And for years after, people couldn't wrap their brains around the entire family getting massacred in the way that they did.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to comprehend. All their belongings obviously were cleaned up. Everything was destroyed, so there was no trace left of them. So the Romanovs were gone.
So now we're in wrap-up time. Judgment time.
Judgment time. And I have been obviously living in this Russian history zone for so long, and I keep contemplating and going back and forth and all around. Okay. Do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
You go first. It's your individual. I'm curious to see what you say.
So my gut is going 70-30.
I think I'm pretty close.
So 70% not deserving of a villainous reputation, 30% deserving. So judging against our other ones, definitely way higher than Carolyn Bessette, definitely way higher than Typhoid Mary, because she does have some things that she clearly did that made the situation worse.
Yeah, she had agency.
She did when she was controlling Russia during the war. She was making decisions. She was dismissing ministers. She was being told by many, many people that things needed to change. And she was stubborn, part of her personality, and would not change that idea. And she was so stuck on that idea of an autocracy and keeping it the throne for her son, even though obviously what ends up happening, her son never going to be on the throne because of his death. Now, the reason why I still give her a good chunk of, I don't want to say goodness, but undeserving of the villain piece is, one, there's definitely more people involved, Nicholas including.
Yeah.
She's coming from limited options. While she saw a constitutional monarchy, she very much buys into the system in Russia, which I can't fault her totally for, because that's what she's married into, and the church says it, and she's religious, and that's what she's going to go with. Mm-hmm. So not shocking for her to do that. And as a mother, I know I would do many, 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 many things to help my children, especially if one of my children had a disease that was incurable, and many times they were close to death, and suddenly this person can offer miraculously something where he does survive multiple times when he shouldn't. So it's really hard for me to judge her there as a mother, to be like, don't listen to him or don't trust him.
Yeah, she doesn't have any other options. We already saw that the doctors have failed her. There's nothing they can do at this point in time. So yeah, that's why she leans into the mystic Rasputin.
Yeah, right. And it, again, also not surprising because of her religious faith, which I also can't. I'm not going to make her be a villain because she's religious and those are her beliefs. As I said, the big things that stick out to me as things that do throw her in the more villainous category is that inability to recognize the end when it was coming, especially when her sister, the Grand Dukes, the other Romanovs were all telling them this, and still she would not shift, and dismissing all these different ministers, basically instead of a good leader trying to move forward or try to figure out solutions together, compromises, that were very much just like, nope, you're gone. Especially if they were against like Rasputin and stuff.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if you're wrapped up on yours, but yeah, I would say either 70-30 or 60-40. As you said, she did face a lot of challenges, both due to the political climate, which she could not control, but she certainly didn't help. And her own personality often made those situations worse.
Right.
I'm sure there are consorts who behaved similarly, and I know there are ones who took over the ruling of their husbands when their husbands were weaker in terms of personality, but they were fortunate to live in less turbulent times. It's just hard because I don't think she's a villain. I think she's prickly. She's sometimes difficult to like, as we've seen, and I'm not a fan of autocracy, I will say that, which she seemed willing to die for.
Yeah.
And obviously there's just the true pathos of her story. And her love story is beautiful. And I love that her and Nicholas had that bond, but part of me thinks perhaps
a toxic bond.
Yeah, perhaps she would have been better off. She would have at least probably lived longer if she had married some
other cousin.
Yeah, some other cousin, some other dupe, and lived a quieter life. It's just hard to approach her without thinking of that end, which,
makes you sympathetic.
Yeah, the viewers can't see, as you were saying that, and I've heard it so many times, but it still takes the breath away, especially I can see the case why Nicholas was being held and killed. It's a cruel justice, but justice nonetheless, and you might not agree with it, but you can see how they got to it. But the children in Alexandra, I know she was tied to his regime, but she's not an elected official. She was there to support him. That's where it feels less like cruel justice and more like just cruelty. Although, even if given the choice, I don't think Alexandra or the daughters would have left Nicholas or Alexei. You can see how it got to that point. Yeah, it's hard. Like you said, she makes a lot of mistakes. I don't know if there's ever a way out of it. Had Rasputin go away and fired less ministers. I don't know if there was a way out of it at that point, but perhaps.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to go back to the beginning of her reign and be like, okay, Nicholas, you're going to make some reforms.
Yeah.
Alexandra, you're going to go out and mingle with the people more and not show on your face everything you're feeling. And then you're not going to keep all these secrets from the people that make you less sympathetic.
Yeah. The road to Ekaterinburg is a lot longer than we give it credit for.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
That's bad. But I think those mistakes early on, and then everything's just compounded. It's like the people kind of made their, as we know, first impressions of her, and
that's really hard. That's really hard to overcome a first impression,
And she never did anything to change it, right? When she was doing the nursing or when she was, as time went on, she didn't decide, okay, now I'm going to bring in more of society. Instead, she closed herself off more. So it's both hard to be sympathetic with that, but also acknowledging that that was her personality. Like you said, when calling her prickly, while she might not have been like the most fun type of monarch, she supposedly was kind and fun with her family. And so I would consider myself somewhat of an introvert, and I feel like I'm much more comfortable with my family and friends. And so that idea of that public and personal, private persona, I do sympathize with her there. However,
but that's not
I would not choose to be a royal.
No, especially at this time, and definitely not in Russia.
Okay, well, so we have a little more villainous in Alexandra, but probably for most people less than maybe they came into this episode.
Yeah, I'd be really curious if you want to plug, because there is an option for you guys to get in touch with us and tell us what you think.
Oh, yeah. So we are going to start, hopefully, if people do this will be really fun, for our next episodes after they air. So, like, this is the end, right, of the Alexandra series. You can send a short clip Could be anywhere from, I would say, a minute to 3 minutes. I mean, if you want to go up to 5 minutes, that's fine. Like, I would say 5 being probably the max. If you want to give your opinion, whether you agree with us, disagree, doesn't matter. We're not only going to choose ones that are in agreement with us. You can record that and you can send that to us at our email, which is ambivalent.offenders.podcast@gmail.com. So ambivalent, again, if you don't know how to spell that, I know I sometimes mess it up. AMBIVALENT .offenders .podcast@gmail.com. So if you want to send your opinion on any of the villains we've done so far, you can do it on like a scale like we do out of 100%. However you want to do it, let us know and we will pick, depending on the length of them, 1 or 2 a week, hopefully, to be able to share at the top of the episode or at the end. I don't know. We'll figure it out. It's new, but we thought it would be a fun idea.
Yeah.
And I think we'll for sure start by making Erin's husband, Matt, because he's a history teacher. We're going to make him submit his thoughts on Alexandra. So you get to see a little preview, a little snapshot. But you don't have to be a history teacher to give your opinion.
No.
Don't feel like you need credentials. We don't judge.
Nope.
So
we want to hear it based on what we've told you.
Yes. Or if you've done your own research, maybe you know more. Maybe you are somebody who's obsessed with the Romanovs. As I said, this is certainly not a comprehensive look at the Romanovs in general. Okay, we're going to end it there. So remember, giveaway on Instagram ends this Friday. Please subscribe, download, like us on Instagram. And if you want to share your opinion on any of our villains, what you think, whether they deserve their reputation or not, record and send to ambivalent.offenders.podcast@gmail.com. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
I was going to say we're done with Russian history, but I can't say that forever. But we're done with the series.
We are. So new person coming up on Monday.
Sunday.
Sunday
or Monday. Yeah. Yep. Depending on when it gets edited. Either late Sunday night or early Monday. So we will talk to you then.
Bye, guys.
Bye.